Most people misunderstand how an empath reaches their breaking point. They imagine it as a sudden emotional explosion of dramatic reaction after one final insult. But that's not how it works. An empath doesn't snap. An empath accumulates. What you're looking at from the outside often appears to be patience, tolerance, even weakness. But internally, something very different is happening. Every interaction is being processed, not just emotionally, but cognitively. Empaths are constantly reading tone, noticing inconsistencies, tracking behavior patterns. They are absorbing not just what is said, but what is meant, what is hidden, and what is repeated. And here's where it becomes important to understand the distinction. An empath's greatest strength, their ability to feel deeply, is also what allows them to analyze deeply. This isn't blind emotion. It's emotional intelligence operating at a high level, quietly building a psychological profile over time. In the early stages, an empath gives the benefit of the doubt. That's almost automatic. They assume good intent. They fill in the gaps with optimism. When someone lies, they consider the possibility that there's a reason. When someone manipulates, they look for the wound behind the behavior. This is why empaths stay longer than they should.
Not because they don't see the problem, but because they understand it too well. But understanding does not mean ignoring. And this is where the shift begins. Every broken promise gets logged. Every subtle act of disrespect gets stored. Every moment where something felt off but couldn't yet be proven. It all goes somewhere. Not into confrontation, not into conflict, but into observation. And over time, a pattern emerges. What was once a series of isolated incidents starts to connect into a clear structure. The empath begins to see that this isn't random behavior. It's consistent, predictable, intentional, or at the very least, unchanging. At this point, something critical happens. The empath stops asking, "Why are they like this?" and starts asking, "Why am I still here?" That question is dangerous, not emotionally, but logically. Because once the empath turns their attention inward, the dynamic begins to shift. They are no longer focused on fixing the other person. They're analyzing their own participation in the pattern. And with that awareness comes clarity. Clarity strips away illusion. It removes the stories we tell ourselves to justify staying. It exposes the gap between what someone says and what they consistently do. This understanding begins to turn inward, toward protection, toward self-respect, toward alignment with reality instead of hope. And this transition is almost invisible to the person on the receiving end because the empath doesn't announce it. They don't make a scene. They don't issue ultimatums. They simply start seeing clearly. And once someone sees clearly, they cannot unsee. This is why the buildup matters so much, because by the time the empath reaches the point of being fed up, they are no longer reacting emotionally in the way people expect. They are operating from a position of informed awareness. They've already run the scenarios. They've already tested the patterns. They've already given more chances than most people would. So when the shift happens, it feels sudden to everyone else. But to the empath, it's the most logical conclusion in the world. There's no confusion left, no internal debate, no need for closure from the other person, because the closure came from observation. And that's what makes this stage so powerful and so underestimated. A narcissist relies on unpredictability, on keeping others emotionally off balance. But a fed-up empath is no longer off balance. They've moved past reaction and into recognition. They are no longer trying to figure the other person out.
So if you're trying to understand why a fed-up empath becomes so formidable, don't look at the moment they walk away. Look at everything that happened before that moment. The quiet observations, the internal calculations, the gradual shift from emotion to clarity. Because by the time they leave, they're not acting on impulse. They're acting on truth. If the first shift is awareness, the second is far more unsettling for both sides. Because what follows clarity is not anger, not confrontation, not revenge. It's something much quieter and far more decisive. It's detachment. Most people assume that when someone has had enough, they'll express it loudly. They'll argue, demand change, draw a line in the sand. But that assumption comes from a misunderstanding of how power actually operates in human dynamics. Emotional reactions, whether positive or negative, still signal engagement. They keep the connection alive. And for someone who thrives on control, attention, or validation, even conflict is a form of access. This is why a narcissistic personality doesn't necessarily fear anger. Anger is predictable. It can be provoked, redirected.
They've stepped into a different framework entirely, one based on alignment, clarity, and self-regulation. And within that framework, their decisions become simple. If something aligns, they move toward it. If it doesn't, they move away. No drama, no confusion, no need for prolonged analysis once the pattern is established. That simplicity is the result of everything that came before. The awareness, the detachment, the boundaries. It's the natural conclusion of a process that has refined their perception to the point where truth becomes obvious. And when truth becomes obvious, hesitation disappears. So when we talk about a fed-up empath being more dangerous than a narcissist, we're not talking about aggression or retaliation. We're talking about someone who can no longer be easily influenced, misled, or controlled. We're talking about someone who sees clearly, decides quickly, and acts accordingly. Someone who doesn't need to prove anything because they're no longer operating within a system that requires validation. And that is a level of independence that most people underestimate until they encounter it. Because once someone reaches that point, the only thing that determines whether you have a place in their life is alignment with reality. Not words, not intentions, not potential, just truth. And if there's one thing to take from all of this, it's this. The most powerful transformation you can undergo is not becoming harder. It's becoming clearer. Because clarity doesn't just change how you see others. It changes what you're willing to accept